All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming out to the Minocqua Brewing Company for Science on Tap on such a bitter cold night. I guess that's relative. Not quite so cold as it's been the last couple of nights. Thank you very much for coming, though. This is a great turnout. We're very sorry we couldn't have our presentation in December when we were planning to have the Dean of the College of Ag and Life Sciences, but she will be back hopefully in the spring. The weather was really bad. Nobody wanted to come. So my name is Susan Knight. I work at the University of Wisconsin Trout Lake Station, one of our sponsors here. Our other sponsors here are the Minocqua Public Library, the Lakeland Badger Chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association, UW Trout Lake Station, and UW Kemp Natural Resources Station, and of course we're hosted by the Minocqua Brewing Company here, so thanks to them and thanks to you. The purpose of our organization is to get some science going on up here in the Northwoods, and the emphasis is on science. Tonight we have kind of a mix of science and management, very nice combination, we think. Oh, sorry, thought somebody was talking to me. We do have live video streaming for those who cannot attend. Obviously not relevant for those that are here now, but if you can't come in the future, you might want to watch the event live, and we also have it archived, so you can watch what you just saw if you would like. Just go to our website, Minocqua, Science on Tap Minocqua, and you should be able to find us pretty easily. By the way, we are also streaming this over at the library. As far as I know, that is working, and over at the Minocqua Public Library. So oftentimes it is pretty crowded here, or you would just like a quieter setting, and you can go over and be with Mary Taylor over there at the library. At 7:30, I am going to remind you, we are not going to take a break, but I will remind everybody that this is very informal, and please feel free at any time, not just at 7:30, to get up, get another beverage, whatever you want to do. Those of you who might have to leave at 7:30, please feel free. We know not everybody can stay for the whole evening. So I will break in at 7:30, but we won't really take a break. And when you leave, please fill out a card if you have any suggestions for future speakers. Also, we have many people on our mailing list, but we struggle reading your writing. So remember, 2's look like Z's, L's look like I's, and I's look like 1's. They're very difficult. So if you're not getting an email and you wish to, please fill out a card, or perhaps there is a clipboard going around. Is Pam here? Does she know? Anyway, if you fill out a card, which you can find at the back of the room, that would be a big help to us, and also to you, so that you could be on our mailing list and get reminded when we've got an event coming up. Briefly, our next event is February 5th, Wednesday, February 5th. Lifestyle and Aging with Neil Binkley, medical doctor. He's the Associate Director of the Institute of Aging at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He's a geriatric specialist with a special interest in vitamin D, osteoporosis. So that should be a very interesting topic for lots of us aging Northwoods or woodsy types. Tonight, though, we have, very pleased, and I know you're all very excited to hear Dr. David MacFarland speak. He is the large carnivore specialist for the Wisconsin DNR Bureau of Wildlife Management. He's responsible for the state's wolf, bear, and cougar management programs. And Dr. MacFarland was educated at Messiah College and the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And he is responsible for the wolf management, bear management, and cougar response programs for the Wisconsin DNR. He previously, just before April, held the position of wolf, bear, and fur bear research scientist for the DNR. He helped develop the rules for the first wolf hunt in 2012. And in taking on his new position, if I might quote him, he said that management of Wisconsin's large carnivores is arguably more interesting now than ever. Wolves are fully state managed for the first time in decades. Bear populations have grown, and cougars are returning after a long hiatus. The decisions made over the next few years will be the foundation for several decades of carnivore management. Dave works out of the DNR office in Rhinelander, and he lives in Rhinelander with his wife and son. Okay, now I don't exactly have a trivia question, but we do have an interesting story about Dave. As a graduate student, Dave studied bears in Wisconsin, and part of the project required collaring of sows with cubs. Now, when do you think is the easiest time to find a sow bear? In the winter. And what are they doing then? They are hibernating. Well, they're not really hibernating, but he'll talk to you about that. But anyway, they're in their dens. This involved finding the dens, crawling into the den with the sow, drugging the animal, and then collaring it. Contrary to popular belief, bears are not true hibernators, and they're very much aware of your presence when you crawl into their den. So I want you to picture this. Here's Dave going head first. Imagine yourself going head first into a den with a sow bear mother, giving her an injection and then putting a radio collar on her. As you can imagine, they would prefer not to be disturbed, especially when they have cubs. Being a group of bright graduate students, Dave and his colleagues developed a sophisticated system of letting the people outside the den know when things were going wrong. So, kicking your legs was the agreed-on sign that to pull the person out. Normally, that can be pretty difficult. And you can see, Dave's a pretty good-sized guy. So one day, Dave and his colleagues were accompanied by a member of the Bear Hunters Association, and Dave says he was a mountain of a man and very helpful, and he agreed to be on leg-pulling duty should the need arise. So Dave crawled into the hole and started his work. The bear didn't take too kindly to this, and Dave soon realized that it was time for him to get out of there. He kicked his legs and found himself flying out of the hole. So, even though he's a pretty big guy, he ended up in the air, suspended by his ankles, with the smiling hunter looking down at him and asking, "Everything okay down there?" Thanks to this fellow, Kendall, this guy earned an invitation back for a few more den visits. A good guy to have on your team. So the moral of the story is never crawl into a bear den unless you have someone at least twice your size watching for the kick. Thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave MacFarland. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, you quickly learn when you're in graduate school that graduate students are pretty expendable. They send you in doing things that probably aren't all that safe. Well, first I just want to thank everybody for coming. This is a great crowd, and beer and bears, what could be better, I guess. But appreciate everybody coming out on a cold night, and hopefully we're going to have some fun tonight. Also want to thank the organizers for inviting me and having me out. I really am looking forward to this. So when I got the invitation to do this and they described the evening, it was sort of the opposite of what I'm normally asked to do. And normally they say, hey, could you talk for an hour and a half and then take 5 minutes of questions? And for this, they said to talk for 15 minutes or so, give you an overview of what I do, and then I'm hoping that we can have an extended conversation afterwards where everybody can have an opportunity to ask questions, and we'll see where the evening takes us. So I'm going to start just by giving a quick overview of the bear, cougar, and wolf programs in the Wisconsin DNR, and give you an overview of where we are with the species, a little bit of history on each, some of the research that is happening either in the department or with partners at universities and in other places, and talk a little bit about the management programs. And I'm going to go through things, I hope, pretty quick and give you the 30,000-foot view, and then we can get into the details later. So I guess in no particular order, I'll start with bears, because that's where I've been working the longest. Go to cougars, because that'll be the shortest section. And then finish with the least controversial topic of wolves. So bears. Wisconsin is fortunate to have a very large and robust bear population. We've estimated the bear population to be somewhere in the mid-20,000s in the state. That's down a little bit from a few years ago. We've reduced the population by design, but the bear population in the state has been growing and expanding since the mid-1980s, when some changes in the management program were developed to allow the bear population to grow and expand. And we have 4 bear management units, and I mention that because of the dividing line between the northern 3 and the southern one is Highway 64. And if you talk to the biologists that have been around for a lot longer than I, when this was originally established, Highway 64 was considered a line below which bears would never exist in the state. And that certainly hasn't been the case. Bears have grown. The bear population has grown in the state, and they've expanded down into the central forest. We now have a very large and robust population in the central forest, and they're continuing to expand. That's actually one of the big management questions that we have right now is, how far should we let them go? We actually had one that was hanging out in the woods behind the Wanakee Elementary School, Wanakee being a suburb of Madison. But we've had confirmed reproduction as far south as the Baraboo Hills. We've had animals in Spring Green and down in Richland County that are reproducing. Reproduction is sort of as a wildlife biologist, when they start making more, you start paying attention. If a lone animal wanders through, then that doesn't tell us too much. But if we start to see reproduction, that's when we start to get interested. And we're starting to get reproduction down in the southwest part of the state. So the bear population continues to make its march south. I don't know where they're headed, but they're still going. The management program for black bears, there's a couple different aspects of it. There's our damage program, and the damage program concentrates on a couple different primary forms of damage and conflict that we see with bears. One is residential, where we have bears getting into bird feeders, getting into trash cans. I'm sure many of you live up here and maybe have had that happen. I know I have, which I'm embarrassed to say because I'm the bear guy. Spend all day telling people how to avoid that, and then I had one in my trash can. But we have that, and then the other primary conflict that we have is with agriculture. Bears are, I believe, second to deer in terms of agricultural damage, primarily eating corn during the milk stage, which is in August. When corn gets to a certain stage, bears really pile into the cornfields and can do quite a bit of damage. So we have a cooperative program with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services, and they deal with bear conflicts in a variety of ways. One of the primary tools just being technical assistance, talking to people like me who left their trash can out and saying, hey, don't do that. Working with people that have bird feeders, things like that. And then in situations where those measures don't work, we do trap and transfer bears. And in extreme cases, when conflicts have risen to a certain level, we do use lethal means, but that's pretty rare with black bears. In terms of research for bears, we have a couple projects right now that I've been involved with. One is a study looking at the foraging ecology of black bears. We've been working with John Pauly, who's a researcher at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and his graduate students, looking at the diet of bears using stable isotope techniques. And one of the things that we're interested in the department is the role of bait in bears. Bait is a legal method for hunting, and it's widely used. And so we've been working with these researchers to gather native foods and gather human-sourced foods, look at the isotopic signatures of those baits, and then look at the isotopic signatures found in the tissue of bears. Those tissue samples are coming from harvested animals. and looking to see what percentage of the diet of the bear is coming from natural foods versus human-sourced foods, just so that we have a better idea of the impact of our management regulations and things on the bear population. And actually this year we're expanding that to fishers to look at sort of the unintended consequences and the trophic cascading of a non-target carnivore. So a fisher isn't the animal that they're trying to bait, but obviously you throw cookies in the woods and a lot of things will eat it, and so we're looking at that. The other project that I've been involved with is looking at the population size, estimating the population size. We used a technique known as a mark recapture, using tetracycline as a biomarker. Mark recapture is a technique that is widely used in wildlife science. It was originally developed actually in the 1600s to estimate the population of France, the human population of France. And then some fishery biologists up in Scandinavia looked at that and said, hey, I bet we could do that for fish. And so it was used for cod and herring stocks in the North Sea. And then some wildlife ecologists said, hey, I bet we could do that on land too. And it's been used ever since. It's probably one of the most tried and true methods in wildlife ecology. And essentially it relies on marking a portion of the population, letting them go back out into the world and do their thing, taking another sample and looking at the proportion that's marked. So when they did this in France, they actually used the church birth records as the mark, and so a certain percentage of the population had their births registered in these books, and they wanted to know how many people hadn't, and so by finding the proportion, they could calculate the number of animals, or sorry, people. People are animals too, though. So. So we've co-opted this for bears, and the way that we did it was to take tetracycline-laced baits and put them out into the landscape and let bears eat them. Tetracycline is a fairly commonly used antibiotic in veterinary medicine, and it has the curious property of staining bone tissue, and so that marks the animals. And then by taking samples from harvested animals, we could calculate the proportion of the animals that had our marks. We knew how many we marked, and we could calculate the population size from there. So it was quite the project. We went through 3,500 pounds of peanut butter and about 90,000 marshmallows. And we ended up with about 1,000 very excited bears that found peanut butter and marshmallows in the woods. So, and that project wrapped up actually just a couple weeks ago. We got the final data back, and that's how we know how many bears we have in Wisconsin, is from research like that. In terms of management, moving forward, we're going to be rewriting our bear management plan. At some point, once the wolf management plan is done, because I waved the white flag and said, please don't make me do both. So in the next couple of years, we are going to be writing new bear management plan, and that's going to be looking at our entire management program and what direction we want to be going. So I think that's the 30,000-foot view on bears. So I'll move on to cougars. One common misconception with cougars is that the DNR is denying the existence of cougars in Wisconsin. So, hi, my name's Dave. I work for the DNR. There are cougars in Wisconsin. So hopefully I can dispel that. I mean, we have a cougar guy, that's me. We have a cougar committee, and every year we issue a report that says, hey, here's where the cougars were this year. So if we're denying it, we're really bad at it. But we don't have many. Cougars are relatively new to Wisconsin. Well, I shouldn't say that. Cougars were here for a long time, and then based on the activities of people that came before us, there were no more cougars. They were extirpated from the state somewhere around the turn of the century, the last one, 1900s. And they were gone, and we started to get reports of cougars coming into the state, and none of them had been substantiated. And then there was a report in 2008 of a cougar in a barn down in Greene County, Rock County, right on the Illinois border. And so the person that called sounded credible enough that one of the biologists went out and they said, yeah, it's in the barn. And so they went and opened the barn and out ran a cougar. And all right, cougars are back. And cougars, something that just happens with cougars, their paws tend to get cut in the snow, and so in the winter you can find blood in the tracks. And so we've been able to get DNA samples from some of the cougars that have come through, and that particular cougar we got a DNA sample from, and it ran out of the barn and wasn't seen again until a few weeks later when the Chicago Police Department got a call saying there's a cougar in downtown Chicago. And that sounds even less credible than in a barn in Rock County. But down they went, and sure enough, there was a cougar in a drainage ditch there in Chicago, and that animal was euthanized by the Chicago PD. But looking at the genetic material that was obtained in Wisconsin and then from the cougar itself, we know it was the same animal, but also we know that that animal shared characteristics with every animal that we've had in Wisconsin. It was a male. We've never had a female in Wisconsin in modern, since 2008. And genetically, it was similar to the animals that live in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And the Black Hills of South Dakota are the nearest established population of cougars to Wisconsin. And so what we think is happening, based on all the information that we have available to us, is that a cougar population established in the Black Hills, and for those of you who have been there, it's where Mount Rushmore is, very nice, you should go visit. It's basically an island of habitat. There isn't a lot that's like it very close. And so that population has become oversaturated. It's a fully saturated population, and so the majority of the animals that get to a dispersing age are dispersing out of the Black Hills. And some of them get lucky and go west and they find more cougars, and some of them get unlucky and go east and need to take a long stroll before they realize there are no other cougars. And those are the animals that we believe are coming into Wisconsin. We've been confirming cougars in the state every year since 2008. We've had at least 2 this year, 1 last year. It's next year. We have not had 2 this week. In 2013, we had a couple. One was in Florence County, and one was just before Christmas in Bayfield County. And we have a response protocol. We don't really have a management program for cougars because we don't have an established population. We have a response protocol. And we go out when people have evidence of a cougar that we believe is credible. We'll go and verify the site for trail camera photos. That's how we get the majority of these. Or we'll go out and identify tracks and confirm that there were cougars. And one really interesting, I think this is one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard in wildlife, especially for a Wisconsin story. A couple years ago, we had a cougar that was, it was initially picked up on the west side of Minnesota. And, you know, they said they had a cougar, and a lot of these cougars are moving east. And so it showed up in Wisconsin. We picked it up on trail cameras 10 or 12 times in Wisconsin. We actually got 3 DNA samples from it. And based on the trajectory, oftentimes, and there's not many cougars out there, and I think everybody has a trail camera now. Or 2 or 3. And so we actually, when these animals start moving through, we can almost track them through the state. And so based on the trajectory of the sightings that we received, it looked like this animal was headed up to the UP. And so it headed that direction, and it disappeared, and it wasn't heard from again. And then about 8 or 9 months later, the New York Department of Environmental Conservation got a phone call from a farmer up in Buffalo area saying, I think a cougar just ran through my field. And they said, no, a cougar did not just run through your field. And he said, well, it went underneath my fence and I have hair from it. And he said, would you like it? And they said no, because it was not a cougar. There are no cougars in New York. New York's still denying them. And so that was sort of the end of that. And then about 6 or 8 months later in Connecticut, a cougar got hit by a car. And so the initial thought was, okay, this is an escaped pet, because people have pet cougars, which is not safe. But but people occasionally do have pet cougars. And so the initial thought was, this has to have been an escaped pet. And they did a genetic analysis on it, and the vast majority of captive cougars in the United States come from South American genetic lineage. And this animal came from a lineage from the Black Hills. I thought, okay, that's interesting. So then they compared it with the genetic database with the lab that we work with, and sure enough, it was the same animal that had come through western Minnesota and through Wisconsin. And so this is actually the longest confirmed dispersal for a terrestrial mammal, period. So it's pretty amazing. We can't say definitively that this animal started in the Black Hills of South Dakota, but we're pretty sure. We know that it was at the very least on the western edge of Minnesota. So how cool is that? So moving forward with cougars, we don't really expect a cougar population to establish in Wisconsin anytime soon. Like I said, they've all been males. We've never had a female in the state in modern times. And from what we know about cougar biology, we're about 2 to 3 times the dispersal distance from the Black Hills, 2 to 3 times the female dispersal distance. And so at least one other population, based on what we know about how far female cougars will take a walk, at least one other cougar population would have to establish between the Black Hills and here before we would expect a population. So, and bears will never be south of Highway 64. So we'll see what happens, but based on what we know, we're not expecting anything anytime soon. Moving on to wolves. So this wolves obviously have been in the news a lot. They've been a pretty controversial thing in Wisconsin, especially for the last couple of years. But really, wolves have been controversial pretty much everywhere for a long time. And that's certainly true in Wisconsin right now. So I'll talk a little bit about the recovery of wolves in the state. Wolves, like cougars, were extirpated from Wisconsin. There was, beginning in the late 1800s, around 1880, there was a bounty that was placed on wolves. And in addition, there were government agents who were hired to go and use strychnine and use other tools to eliminate wolves and other predators from the landscape. And those programs were successful, and it led to the extirpation of wolves from the state of Wisconsin in the 1960s. And so we had a situation for only about 15 years where there weren't wolves in Wisconsin, but wolves remained, native wolf populations remained in northern Minnesota. And as the tide turned in public opinion and environmental laws started to come in the 1970s, the Endangered Species Act being one of the primary ones and wolves being one of the first species that were listed, those additional protections allowed for the growth and the expansion of the wolf population that was in Minnesota. And that population came down and recolonized Wisconsin. So that's another common misconception, is that the DNR or the state or whoever reintroduced wolves into the state of Wisconsin. That's not true. Wolves were reintroduced into Yellowstone and into some other places, but the wolf population in Wisconsin is a naturally recolonized population. And so in the mid-1970s, we started to see wolf populations begin to recover in the state. And that population slowly grew and expanded, and actually very slowly grew up until about the mid-1990s. And based on some analysis that was done by Tim Van Deelen and his graduate students, some of you may remember Tim from November when Tim and Donna Waller were here talking about deer. But Tim and his graduate students did an analysis looking at population growth in wolves, and what they identified is that in the early period of recovery, wolves seem to have been suppressed by something that's called an Allee effect. And an Allee effect is this sort of unusual thing that happens in wildlife population dynamics. Normally, population growth is density dependent, and so when you have very small populations, there's no limits on their resources. There's plenty of food, there's plenty of habitat, and so they can grow very quickly. And then as the population starts to get to a certain size, they begin to get resource limited, either food or prey availability or denning sites or whatever. Something becomes limiting and their population growth begins to slow. An Lee effect is a situation where that is flipped on its head and you have suppressed population growth at low population levels. And it's pretty rare. It generally happens in one of two situations, either with animals that are so widely dispersed that they can't find each other. So for example, that's one of the concerns with tiger populations right now. Tigers have huge home ranges, and there's so few of them out there, and they're covering so much area that they just can't find each other to make more tigers. So that's one situation where it can occur. The other situation where it can occur is when you have complex social structures and the population isn't large enough to have functional social structures, and something like hunting efficiency would decline in the face of a small population. We don't know why this Lee effect occurred with wolves, but it appears to have occurred. In the mid-1990s, something happened and they were released from that, and the population began to grow. And the population continued to grow to the point where in April, when we last produced a population estimate for wolves, we estimated them to be just over 800 animals. So the April 2013 population estimate was between 809 and 834 wolves in the state. And we monitor wolves using a technique that's known as territory mapping with telemetry. And this is the interactive part of the program. Everybody can get involved. We use volunteers to do it. And so if anybody's interested in monitoring wolves, you can talk to me after and I can tell you how to get involved. But what we do is a combination of data sources are used to estimate the population. One is radio telemetry data. So we trap and collar wolves, and we use the telemetry data to delineate pack territories. And then this is one of the more fun things that I get to do from time to time in my job. We have aircraft that go out and fly low enough that you can actually see the animals, and we'll count them from the air, which is the light breakfast days at work. You're just going to want to go egg whites on toast that day. But with the number of wolves that we have in the state and the number of packs, we had 214 packs last year. We don't have the resources to have a radio collar in every single pack. And so we use ground-based tracking to get estimates of the pack sizes for the other areas, for the other packs. And that's where we use volunteers and DNR staff. People go out in the winter, this time of year when there's snow on the ground, and drive around in our tracking blocks looking for wolf sign, and using a variety of techniques you can estimate the number of animals that are in that pack. And then we use that, we aggregate all of that data together to estimate the population size. So it's a pretty unique program, and one that I'm pretty proud of. The state, I didn't develop it, but it's been around for quite a while, and I think it's a pretty neat program. And I think it's a great way that we can involve interested citizens in wolf monitoring, and something that if people are interested, this weekend, training at Trees for Tomorrow, and actually at Crex Meadows. So if anybody came from Grantsburg to this, you get a free beer and we have a training. But last year, though, a combination of volunteers and DNR staff tracked over 13,000 miles of snow-covered roads looking for wolves. So it's a pretty extensive program. We have some other research in addition to our monitoring program. Wolves are a very heavily studied animal, and so there's a number of research projects going on in the state looking at population levels, looking at food habits, looking at habitat. There's a bunch going on with wolves, but probably the thing that's generated the most interest lately has been the transition of wolves from an endangered species to a game species in Wisconsin. Wolves were listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act beginning in the 1970s, and then there was a series with legal actions where they were on, then they were off, and they were on again, they were off. They were most recently delisted on January 27th of 2012. On the same day, legislation was introduced to transition wolves to a game species. That legislation was passed and signed into law on April in April of 2012, and the department was directed to develop a wolf hunting and trapping season. That was, the first season was in 2012, and the second season was just here in 2013. So the hunting and trapping season, the law that was passed specifies a number of things about that, including the starting date, the methods that can be used, things like that. What's left to the discretion of the DNR are a few things, including the zoning that we use to direct that harvest pressure, and also the quotas and the number of permits. And the quotas and permits that have been issued have been designed to be in line with our approved wolf management plan. We have a wolf management plan which was originally written in 1999. It was reaffirmed by our Natural Resources Board, which is the decision-making body in the agency. It was reaffirmed by them in 2007. And it identifies a population objective that is well below our current population. And so that explains the quotas that we've had are designed to begin putting downward pressure on the wolf population, which some people think is long overdue and some people think is completely inappropriate. So it's certainly been a contentious issue for the department and for the state. But the two hunting seasons are now, we're now in two hunting seasons. The first season, 117 wolves were taken, and then in 2013, 257 wolves were taken during the hunting season. Now, with all of these changes, the Natural Resources Board has directed the department to revisit its wolf management program. And we're doing that. There's a wolf management committee, wolf advisory committee, which I chair, and a number of the members, at least a couple of the members are in the room today. And that committee has been tasked with revising the wolf management plan, and we're working on that, and all aspects of wolf management are being looked at, including our damage program, our zoning of the state, the population objectives, basically every aspect of it. And so we're working on that now, and we're anticipating that we're going to begin to have drafts available that will be released for public comment in the fall of this year. And we're hoping to have final approval by the Natural Resources Board in time to begin influencing decisions in 2015. So hopefully about a year from now, we'll be through this process and we'll have a clearer picture of where we're going to be going in wolf management moving forward. So maybe that wasn't as quick as I had hoped, but that's kind of what I do and what we're working on, and I think I'll stop there and open it up for whatever questions people might have.
I got one. As soon as they're off your endangered list and you decide to make them a game species, was that because you thought their population would become too high and actually become a nuisance animal, or just satisfy people who thought there was too many?
Yeah, so I've been asked to repeat all the questions for the people in the nooks and crannies out there. So the question was, wolves were removed from the endangered species list and then immediately transitioned to a game species. Was that to avoid perceived problems or to satisfy people who thought there were too many wolves? Is that?
Yep, that's it.
Okay. Well, first, thank you. Good night. First, I'm going to go with a big. First, I want to mention that this decision was done legislatively. So this was a state law that was passed, and so I wasn't fully involved. I wasn't involved with the decision making. So I can't say what the motivations were of the people that signed the law, but I can touch on the other aspects of that. One, wolf populations. The original delisting criteria for wolves in Wisconsin, as established by the Fish and Wildlife Service, was to have 80 wolves in Wisconsin and 100 in a combined population with Michigan. At the time of delisting in January of 2012, we were over 14 times above the federal delisting level. And so by the Fish and Wildlife Service's own criteria, we were well beyond the population level that would be considered endangered. And with the legal action that had been taken, placing wolves on and off the endangered species list, when wolves were on the endangered species list in Wisconsin, the state did not have the authority to use any conflict management tool or any lethal conflict management tools. There were non-lethal tools that could be used, but lethal tools were not available. And I think that led to some animosity towards wolves when there were problems, and wolves do cause problems. All animals cause problems. I cause problems. All animals cause problems, so I'm not singling out wolves. But wolves do occasionally get into trouble from a human perspective. I don't think the wolves think they're doing anything wrong when they eat cattle, but some farmers disagree. But we do have cattle that are killed by wolves. We have hunting dogs that are killed by wolves. We have pet dogs that are occasionally killed by wolves. We never have people that are killed by wolves, despite what some people will say. We've never had a person injured by a wolf in the state of Wisconsin. So there's very little human threat, but we do have threat to people's property. And so I think there are people who, in the passing of that law and in some of the management changes that have been made, some of the motivation behind that is to begin reducing some of the conflicts. And yeah, was that a bureaucratic dodge or what? I don't know, how'd I do?
Do you think the primary objective is because a lot of our tourism is based on hunting, and I feel like a lot of hunters have a negative opinion on wolves because it has affected their opportunities to hunt deer? That's what I do.
Yeah, so what I will... Oh, sorry, I'm supposed to repeat it. Are we shooting wolves because they're killing deer? Does that sum it up? Well, one thing I'll say, the management decisions that are being made right now are in accordance with the approved wolf management plan. That wolf management plan identifies a population objective, and the DNR is required by statute and by rule to implement the approved management plans. So that's my bureaucratic answer. So let me touch on that next. So why is the current goal 350? And why is the current goal to bring the population down? When that goal was first established, we had far fewer wolves than we have right now. And it was seen as being something that was relatively close to about 75% of the estimated carrying capacity in the state. And once again, just like bears will never be south of 64 and there's no female cougars, the biologists were wrong at the time. And the carrying capacity of wolves was actually a lot higher than what was estimated. And so that was considered to be a biologically reasonable number at the time. And it was also considered to be a compromise between the competing interests of wolves, that it would be a number that would allow for the long-term viability of the wolf population while also addressing some of the problems that wolves cause. And one of the issues that's frequently cited by groups and bars is the impact of wolves on the deer population. And wolves eat deer, and that's true. It's one of their primary prey sources, but the impact of wolves on the deer population, based on the research that's been done, again, by folks at the University of Wisconsin, including Tim. I should have brought Tim again. He was here last time. We should have tag teamed this one. But Tim and some others have done some research looking for a signal in the data that would show an impact of the wolf population on the deer population, and they simply cannot find it. The primary driver of deer population change in the state is hunters, and habitat factors into that. So while wolves can impact deer populations at a very local level, so if you're hunting and there's a center of activity, the deer are going to leave. It doesn't mean they're gone. It doesn't mean they're eaten, but they're going to leave. And wolves do eat deer, but they're not the primary driver of deer population decline. Or deer population change. I'm not saying there's fewer deer, it depends where you are, but it's not the primary driver. That said, there's certainly political pressure that there are certainly people who would like to see fewer wolves because they perceive that as being a positive for deer hunting. Did I get it?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
All right. Yeah.
Has the small population of wolves that we have here right now affected the ecology of our Northwoods woodland?
It has. Yeah. Oh, the answer is yes. So, next question. Now, the question was, have wolves influenced the ecology of the Northwoods? And they have. Wolves are apex predators. All apex predators can have a profound influence on the ecosystems in which they live. And with wolves, this is best studied in the Yellowstone ecosystem. And in Yellowstone, I'll touch on Yellowstone first before the Wisconsin-specific research. But in Yellowstone, what they began to find after wolves began to recolonize is that, again, they weren't killing all of the elk. Out there, elk are the primary prey. They were killing elk. Elk are delicious, but they weren't reducing the elk population to the point that was responsible for a recovery in the biotic community. They were moving the elk around, and so elk, in the absence of that predator, elk were concentrating around riparian corridors and degrading the riparian corridors. And as wolves reestablished, they were moving the elk around. Elk were going different places, and those riparian corridors started to recover. The recovery of the riparian corridors led to positive ecological benefits for other species, songbirds that relied upon those systems, the plant diversity there. And so that's sort of the classic example. That's where it's best studied. People have begun looking for that in other places, including Wisconsin. And I talked about our population monitoring program. We have extraordinarily good data going back for over 30 years on where and how many wolves have been in different parts of the state. And researchers from various places around the country have looked at these data. And what they've actually found, this was just published in the journal Ecology this summer. It won the Paper of the Month award. It's on somebody's fridge right now. What that paper was able to show was that the plant diversity in starting over. Going to rephrase that. What the paper showed is the longer an area was occupied by a wolf territory in the state of Wisconsin, the higher the plant biodiversity that was in that area. And so then some researchers at Notre Dame started thinking about this and said, okay, are they killing the deer or are they changing the behavior of the deer? And so some folks, there's that Notre Dame research facility up by Land O'Lakes. And so they've been doing some research up there looking at deer that are in occupied wolf territories and deer that are outside of wolf territories. And using a variety of techniques to look at the behavior of the animal. And what they found is that the foraging behavior of the deer in the presence of that apex predator is different than the foraging behavior of the deer in the absence of the apex predator. Essentially, they're spending more time being vigilant and less time foraging, so more time head up, less time head down. And they're moving around more. They're not staying in one spot for an extended period of time. And that's reducing the browsing pressure in concentrated areas and allowing for the plant community to respond. So, yeah.
What's the reality of dogs being used to hunt wolves, just as they are with bears? And if so, would that still be covered under the damages clause of like the whole wolf bear thing?
Okay, now we're really done. I just got the dog hunting question. So the question was, what is the reality of dogs being used to hunt wolves? And if that is happening, are they eligible for the damage compensation program? Okay. So hound hunting in Wisconsin is a popular activity. It is a activity that has a relatively long history in the state, and hounds are now currently used to hunt most of the carnivores in the state. There's hound hunters that pursue bear, coyotes, bobcat, raccoons. There's a number of animals that people are hunting with hounds. And so when the wolf hunting legislation was developed and signed into law, it included hound hunting regulations that were very similar to our bear hunting regulations. And so yes, hounds are a legal method of hunting for wolves in the state of Wisconsin right now. In 2012, there was legal action that was taken by a coalition of humane societies, some of our former wolf trackers, some hunters, trying to remember everybody who was on that, but there was legal action taken attempting to ban the use of hounds in wolf hunting under the argument that it was in violation of animal cruelty laws. And in 2012, that legal action was working its way through the courts, and the judge in the case put a temporary injunction on the use of hounds. That injunction was in place throughout the 2012 wolf hunting season and was lifted in January of 2013. And when it was lifted, that made hounds a legal method for the 2013 season. And the legislation stipulates that hounds are not allowed until the Monday after the 9-day gun deer season. And so this year, that was December 2nd, December 3rd. And at that time, we have 6 wolf management units. And the management units each have specific quotas. And as the quotas are met, the unit closes to hunting. And so when dogs became a legal method of take on that Monday after the 9-day gun deer season in early December, only one zone remained open. That was Zone 3, which is a long zone that goes from kind of the Crex Meadows, St. Croix River area down into Taylor County. And so that was the only part of the state that was still open hunting, and hounds were a legal method on that date, only in that zone. And they became, once the snow hit the ground, they became a fairly effective method. And we had a total of 35 wolves that were harvested with the use of hounds this year. So that's the first part of the question. The second part of the question was the depredation program. Yeah. And we have a depredation and claims program in the state that compensates people for a number of things, damaged corn for farmers, lost livestock, but also by state law, there's compensation for hunting dogs that are killed by wolves. There's a cap placed on the reimbursement amount of $2,500. This year we had 23 dogs that were killed by wolves and were eligible for compensation. And it's important to note, I just want to mention, because this is certainly a controversial thing, and I just think it's important to know the history of that. These compensation programs for wolves have been in place for a number of different things. Livestock is the most common one. And these compensation programs are really designed to improve tolerance of the species, especially during the period of recovery when there were few conflict mitigation tools available. The thought was, okay, if farmers or other property owners are going to bear the brunt of wolf recovery, then they should be compensated so that they're not losing cattle and losing that money. And so, but Wisconsin is the only state that compensates for hunting dogs. And the law that was passed, though, that established the wolf hunting season also stipulated that dogs in the pursuit of wolves were not eligible for compensation. So we still have a compensation program for dogs that are killed while bear hunting or coyote hunting, or if my dog Mesa in the backyard were to get taken, which we all hope doesn't happen, then I would be eligible for compensation too. So it's any dog killed for any reason, hunting or not, unless they're engaged in wolf hunting. Dogs actively engaged in the pursuit of wolves are not eligible for compensation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any zoonotic infections associated with wolves
Cougars. So the questions on zoonotic infections and what diseases we need to look for in wolves, bears, and cougars. And I'll answer the question. We're going to plead ignorance. I'm a population biologist, and I always tell people my knowledge stops at the fur. Once you get inside the animal, I tend to break down a little bit. But there are diseases that do impact these populations with wolves. One of them, and I guess I should know about this because it's outside the fur, is mange. So we do have occasional mange outbreaks in the state. We also have wolves are very closely related to dogs, and so the dog diseases will also influence wolves. So things like parvo, canine distemper, rabies can impact wolves. That's actually more of a problem in Europe than it is here. We don't really have rabies in our wolf population. Bears, I think, have everything, but they're a hardy beast, and and so we don't really see population level impacts on bears, and cougars I'm really going to plead ignorance on because we really don't have too many cougars, so I haven't paid much attention to the diseases. So, yeah.
What's the logic between allowing a population of 20,000 bears, which are also predators, and only 500 wolves? It seems like a big disparity for an animal that's being damaged, similar damage to deer, corn, crops, whatever. What's the logic? Why wouldn't the wolves be allowed to be 20,000, or the bears be required to be only 500?
That's a good question too. So the question is, what is the logic behind the policy decisions to allow 20,000 plus bears but only a few hundred wolves? And why shouldn't there be 20,000 plus wolves, or why shouldn't there be 500 bears? Does that capture it?
So what's the logic for that disparity?
So we're looking for logic in government policy. So, no, I'm going to get fired. Have a beer, they said. Talk about wolves, they said. It'll be fun. So, there are differences between all species and the distribution of species and the natural densities of species that there's biological limitations on what would be possible. And so, for example, based on everything that we know, it would not be possible to have anywhere near 20,000 wolves in the state. Current estimates of biological carrying capacity being that number that's sort of the maximum that the habitat can sustain, sort of a biologically set number. The current estimates of biological carrying capacity for wolves put the number somewhere around 1,600. So we would never have 20,000 wolves in the state. And I guess with all of these decisions, it's a combination of the science, and the science sets some of the numbers. So there's two sort of primary numbers in wildlife management, as I see it. You have that biological carrying capacity number. So the animals set that one for you, and you have a minimum population viability, which is, if you were to go to below that, you'd have a catastrophic decline and eventual extirpation or extinction of the animal. And between that is where we work, these management numbers. And some of the animals in the state, we manage to biological carrying capacity. Robins, robins do what robins do. We don't do much for management. Some animals we manage below this minimum population viability. Invasive species, Asian carp, I think the management goal is 0. And so for these other species that we have an active management program, we're trying to find a spot between those two biologically set numbers. And doing that is a combination of science. If you get too close to those minimum population viability numbers, you're getting into a risky spot. And so we want to make sure that we not we don't manage anything for just the minimum possible number. We want to make sure that we have healthy, robust populations. And then, on the high side, we're looking at some social and political things. There's the conflicts that bears bring to the state. For example, we had a gentleman who was almost killed by a bear. This year, we had 3 individuals attacked by bears. We had tens of thousands of dollars in damage caused by bears. We had a number of residences entered by bears. Bears cause problems, and so in those areas where problems are high, we do reduce populations as one tool used to minimize those conflicts. With wolves, we're doing the same thing in certain areas. So I don't know if that answers the why more of one and less of the other, but that's at least a start to the logic.
Well, but follow-up question then, what in a zone, as you have zones, what if they're not causing any problems? There's no cattle up here. I think they're killing an occasional deer, stealing an occasional pet cat that's out the door. What else are they doing so wrong if they're not completing the deer herd, they're not killing any cattle, they're not entering homes? They're not spreading garbage around the yard. Why would that zone have any animals taken?
So there are
Summarize
parts.
that, please.
Oh, sorry. So the follow-up question was, what about in places where they are not causing problems? And I think you're citing specifically this part of the state where there are few cattle operations. Wolves aren't going into houses very much. The conflicts with wolves are relatively lower in this part of the state. And that's an accurate assessment. They're not non-existent. We do have dogs being killed. We do have occasional cattle conflicts, even where cattle is relatively low density. But the conflicts are lower, and that's how we use our zone system. And so if you look at the wolf season in 2013, you'll see that the harvest rate, and there's some people that really dislike when we use the term harvest when we talk about wildlife, and so I apologize, but it's sort of the vernacular of my field. So when you look at the harvest rate, you'll see that in this part of the state, the harvest rate on wolves was much, much lower than it was in the western part of the state, where we have more cattle operations, where our conflicts are concentrated. And you'll see the same with bears. You'll see the same with all the species that we manage. There is an inflection point with any animal, a sustainable number of animals that you can take, and through a hunting season or any other human-caused mortality. And if you were to go above that number, you'll start to cause population decline. If you were to go below that number, you'd have a population increase. And if you were right at it, you'd stay stable. It's just that simple. Finding what those numbers are is very difficult. But what you'll see if you look at this last hunting season is the harvest rate in Unit 2, which is where we're sitting right now, was the lowest of anywhere in the state, and it's because the conflicts were lowest. So.
Before we have another question, let me just break in quickly and remind people that please help yourself. Go up to the bar, get another beverage. Leave if you must. It's a little after 7:30. We got lots of questions left ahead, but please remember this is informal, and we would like to encourage everybody to enjoy whatever Minocqua Brewing Company has to offer. Okay, and with that, I'll turn it. Did you get a chance to have a sip of something? Okay, and we'll take more questions back for Dave MacFarland.
Okay. Should we let things quiet down, or?
I think we'll let things quiet for just 5 minutes, okay? It does look like people are on the move. 5 minutes and we'll be back.
I may ask that.
Yeah, let's get going again.
Okay, folks, we're going to get going again. If everybody can grab a beer and sit down or find a place to stand up.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen.
Is there a question from the floor?
All right. We got a question. Got a question in the back. Folks can simmer down now. All right, go ahead. I'll try to hear you.
Right now, the population goals are, the magic number seems to be 350, intent based on current goals is to reduce the population down to 350. You're doing a management plan now. Going forward, what will determine what those population goals are? And I know realistically there's two factors that may play in. One is politics and one is science. Part two of that question is if you can say, will those goals be changed and what will cause them to change? And will it be more politics or more science?
Thank you. Good night. Okay, so the question, and for those of you who are standing in the out there, there's some seats that have opened up back here. If anybody wants to, there's couches. They're leather. They look comfy. So the question was the current population goal, as articulated in the wolf management plan, is 350 animals. So the question was, are we working to get down to that number? And then we're currently rewriting the wolf management plan. And will that number change? And if it does change, will it change based on science or based on politics? Is that pretty close? Okay, so I guess I'll hit the first one first. The population goal is articulated in the management plan at 350 animals. There's some disagreement over whether that population goal was originally designed to be a cap or a threshold. So I want to acknowledge that controversy. There's some people, and depending on what section of the plan you read, it comes across in different ways. In some places it reads as if it's a management goal to be attained, and in other places it reads as if it's a management threshold above which certain management options will become available to us. But all of that's sort of irrelevant because right now the current interpretation is that it is a goal. So despite that controversy, it's currently being interpreted as a goal. And so the management decisions that are being made right now, with one of the primary ones being the quotas, is to begin reducing the wolf population in accordance with that management plan. However, the agency has been granted the ability to do so in, I need to be careful with my adjectives. I was going to say gradual, but gradual is one of those things that everybody will read that differently. But we've been allowed to not do that immediately, and so the initial season in 2012 took 117 wolves, and the population decline that resulted from that. And it's not just the hunting. We have a lot of other management activities. We have depredation control where wolves are being removed lethally in conflict situations. And so really the impact on the population isn't just our hunting season. It's all of our management activities. And all of the management activities in aggregate in 2012 led to a population reduction of less than 1%. So essentially no change in the population. In 2013, working with researchers at the University of Wisconsin, a graduate student named Jen Stenglein, who did such a great job that we just hired her a couple weeks ago so she could keep doing a great job for us, developed a wolf population model that allowed us to estimate the impact of management activities on the wolf population. And based upon that model, she's estimating that the management activities taken in 2013 will result in a population reduction of somewhere between 10 and 15%. So 10 or 15% off of 800 is not 350, and so we are reducing the population, but we're reducing the population in accordance with that plan, but we're not attempting to get to that number immediately. So that's one bit, and we are in the process of revising the wolf management plan, and one of the issues that's being discussed as part of that is the management objective, the number, and so. We don't have, the committee hasn't begun to discuss that aspect of the plan, so I can't say where things are going to go. I don't know. It's a large committee. There's 26 members of that committee, so I don't know where things are going to end up. And then the committee is an advisory committee. From that advisory committee, it goes to various levels of administration within the DNR who will review and potentially revise the recommendations that come from that committee. And those will eventually get forwarded on to the Natural Resources Board, who makes the final decision and has the ability to make any changes they see fit. So even if I knew where the committee was going to go, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the final number in the plan. And whether it's going to be science or politics, it's going to be both, to be perfectly honest, and I think that that's okay. Management is a combination, in my opinion, of science and politics. Science is neutral on what should be. There's a great quote that I'm going to butcher from Albert Einstein. He said in one of his writings, he said, science is the study of the way the world. Science is a study of what is, but not what should be. And outside of its domain, value judgments of all kinds remain necessary. My shorthand for that is science can't tell you where to go, it can only tell you how to get there. And so how many wolves should be in the state? There are scientific aspects that should be incorporated into that decision, but you can't say that, 652 is a science-based number and 651 is a political-based number. It's just not that cut and dry. So the science-based numbers, again, are those biological carrying capacity and that minimum population viability. And in between are those value judgments come into play. And so we're bringing a ton of science to this. We really are. Our first 5-6 committee meetings were nothing but researchers coming in and giving us the science and giving us the science. We had professors from all over the state and even from as far away as Mississippi that came up to provide insight to the committee. And we've done literature reviews. We've done everything that we can to learn as much as we can about wolves so that we know the science so that we can then begin to incorporate those social aspects in making what we hope is going to be a wise decision. So I don't know if that answered it. I'm going to take a question from the back because I haven't done that yet.
Hey, Dan, was there a population goal for the state prior to the 350?
Yeah, sorry. I need to remember to repeat the question. The question is, was there a population goal prior to the current goal of 350? And the answer to that is not really. Prior to that, wolves were under the Endangered Species Act, and there was a threshold above which they would be removed from that protection. And that threshold, again, was 80 in Wisconsin or 100 combined with Michigan. And as the state began to approach that threshold, that's when the management plan was written, because the anticipation was that that management authority was going to transition from the federal government to the state government. And so that 1999 wolf management plan was written and incorporated that first goal. So I'm going to go someplace else because I already took one from you. So, Rad, go ahead.
Being involved in conservation biology in the early 90s, there was a lot of talk about habitat management and linkage zones and core areas, and this is the key to bringing animals back. It sounds like with the cougars that may be like an island in between here and the Black Hills with some sort of linkage corridor might be key. But with wolves and bears and other things, it seems like they've been much more resourceful in adapting to all sorts of habitat than we might have thought 20 years ago. Is habitat management key to these species?
So the question is about habitat management and habitat connections between habitat being important to wildlife conservation and the observation that bears and wolves seem to have been much more resourceful and not using traditional corridors. And is habitat management an important aspect of it? Is that okay?
They seem to be using everything.
Yeah, and every animal, we talk in wildlife management about specialists and generalists, and every animal is in a different part of that continuum. And we have some very specialized species, like Carner blue butterflies, for example, that need a certain plant species in order to survive. Very specialized animal, or then we have these generalist animals, and bears and wolves really fall into that category. If you look historically at the range of wolves, they were all over everywhere. Lewis and Clark talk about seeing them in the prairie. I mean, we have this idea of them as a mountain species or as deep forest species, but that's only because it's the only place they were left. Doesn't mean it's the only place they can be. And the same with bears. Bears are one of the most widely distributed animals in North America. They live in Mexico. They live in Alaska. So living in different parts of Wisconsin isn't all that surprising. And so the expansion of both of these species into a variety of habitats is consistent with their natural history. And I think there have been habitat changes in the state. We've gone from, if you do the broad brush, we went from old growth to clear cut to early successional, and now in this part of the world we're getting into more sugar maple and things out of aspen. But bears and wolves can live in all of that. And so, habitat is important for all species, and not everywhere is habitat. And we're not going to have too many bears in Milwaukee County, I don't think, because there isn't enough habitat there. But they can use enough variety of habitat that their expansion is, consistent with that. And the question about habitat management, we don't really do active habitat management specifically for these species. They're so wide-ranging. The home ranges of these animals, for both of them, wolves and bears, are roughly the size of a township. So for the DNR to do active habitat management on our properties, which are generally on a much smaller scale, doesn't really work. And so they just kind of go and do their thing.
Mountain lions too, or cougars as well. I mean, they could be in prairies or mountainsides or deep forests as well.
Yeah, and I'm going to plead some ignorance here because I just haven't spent as much time thinking about this for mountain lions. But mountain lions are also can live in a variety of habitats, but they do seem to be a little bit more constricted. And right now they really haven't expanded to the areas surrounding the Black Hills, which would suggest that those areas are not suitable habitat, because they're certainly getting dispersers into areas like the Badlands and other places, both male and female dispersers, but populations aren't establishing. So that would suggest that there's some limiting factor, whether that's a habitat feature that's important to them at some point in their life cycle, or if it's a prey availability issue. I don't know, but it would appear that there's something that's limiting them. Otherwise, we would expect expansion of the mountain lion population out of the Black Hills that would be similar to what we're seeing with bears and wolves in Wisconsin. Yeah, in the hat.
Two quick questions. You suggest a 350 target currently. That's within the dynamic of so many wolves and bears and people and coonhounds, all of which are reproducing.
Mm-hmm.
All of which are, to some degree, having an impact on habitat, which you said is kind of out there. It's up to the people who own it and what they're doing with it. It influences habitat. So how long is that 350 good for? How do you project that? Is that going to be our number for 5 years, 10 years? Is that going to be influenced by trends that you see now? And the second one, just a comment, I think it's an anomaly, but you were talking about there's been no recorded instances of wolf predation on people, and you qualified it with in Wisconsin. Comment on both of those?
You caught me. Okay, so the first question is, the current goal is 350 wolves in Wisconsin, and that's in the context of all these other species, bears, coyotes, etc. And so the question was, how long is that number going to be valid, and how long do we anticipate? And then the second was an astute observation of me saying that there has never been a recorded incident of a wolf attack, and then I said in Wisconsin, which would imply something happened outside of Wisconsin. So let me touch on both of those. The 350 number has been in place since 1999 as a management objective. However, the state hasn't had management authority over the wolf population to begin implementing that policy until 2012. So it's the current goal, but as I've said, we're rewriting the management plan, and by this time next year, that new management plan should have worked its way through the process, and at that time, that's when between now and then is when that decision is going to be made, whether or not that number is still a valid objective, or if that objective should change to a different number, or if we should use some other management strategy that relies less upon population numbers and maybe more on something else. I don't know. So this time next year, I'll be able to answer that question. And then the in Wisconsin thing. So what I said is true. We've never had an injury to a person at the was going to say at the hands of wolves, but they don't have hands. At the paws of wolves. We've never had an injury to a person in Wisconsin from wolves, and that's true. There have been reported incidents in other places, but they're extraordinarily rare when you consider the number of wolves that live in North America and the number of people that live in North America. The number is extraordinarily low. A review paper was written by a researcher named McNay who works in Alaska. He looked at he gathered all the data that he could, and he found that in the period from 1900 to 2000, there were 19 confirmed aggressive encounters between wolves and people. And he defined aggressive encounter, if I can, I'm trying to remember back to when I read it, but basically physical contact. So where maybe a wolf was coming at somebody and maybe even just like bit their clothing. So it didn't even necessarily constitute an injury. And of those 19 incidents, none of them were fatal. Since then, since 2000, and so this is in North America, wolves are all over everywhere. I mean, wolves are a very widely, globally distributed species. So this is only in North America. Since then, there have been 2 confirmed fatalities from wolves. One was in Saskatchewan. A gentleman who was working on in a place up in remote area of Saskatchewan went out for a walk, and the evidence at the scene would suggest that he was killed by wolves. The second incident happened in a town outside of a small town in Alaska, where a woman went for a jog. She was a teacher at a local school, went for a jog, and was killed by wolves that appeared to have been habituated to food at a local dump. And then just recently in Minnesota this summer, there was a bite there was a bite that a camper got bit. He was sleeping in his, it was a 15-year-old boy. He was sleeping in his tent looking out at the stars, so his head was out of the tent, and a wolf came and bit him. And that wolf, there were a couple things that were going on. One, its jaw was deformed, so it seemed to have had some either congenital or injury issue with its jaw, and based on stomach contents and based on prior reports, it had been habituated to that campground. So they're big carnivores. I mean, any big carnivore, heck, my dog, I treat with respect. I mean, you got to treat them with respect. But the relative risk of wolves, when you compare it to the other large carnivores, given the potential that the physical potential that they have as a large carnivore, and then you look at the incidents that occur, the risk is extraordinarily low. If you look at similar numbers for black bears, our other large carnivore in the state, if you look at similar numbers, they're off the charts as compared to wolves. The risk from black bears, and not that I'm saying you should now be scared of black bears, because the risk is still pretty low. I mean, animals actually, when you think about it, you got these 300-pound bears walking in the woods, and they hardly ever kill us. It's very nice of them. So the risk. The risk posed by all of these animals is relatively low when you compare to, everybody who drove here today. Maybe worse when you drive home, but everybody who drove here today has taken a risk that far exceeds the risk from these animals. But the relative risk of bears is much greater than the risk from wolves. For example, we've had 3 confirmed injuries to humans in Wisconsin from black bears just this year. And we've never had anything from wolves, and that was very rare too. We hadn't had an injury for a decade from bears, and then all of a sudden we had 3 this year, including one that was near fatal. So the risk is very, very low. Yes, thank you, Keith. So I forgot my favorite stat. The deadliest animal in Wisconsin is the white-tailed deer. 10 to 15 Wisconsin residents will be killed in vehicle collisions with deer. The majority of them on motorcycles. So, yeah, question back there. I'm going to get to you next.
You mentioned the UP a couple times. What's the population up there, and how much do the states work together to manage
So the question is, how many wolves are in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and how much do the states work together? The current population in the UP is around 600 animals, and so it's a little bit smaller than Wisconsin, but they have a smaller land area. And then collaboration with our neighboring states. We like to talk to each other. The biologists like to talk to each other, but decision makers don't like to be constrained by the decisions of others. So we talk. we do meet. We actually have annually a tri-state, what we call the tri-state fur bearer meeting, and the wolf people come to, where we get together with people that are in my position and in similar positions in the neighboring states. So there's about 10 of us, and we get together every year just to compare notes. What are you doing? And then we communicate with each other throughout. We'll trade emails weekly of, hey, this incident came up here. Have you guys dealt with this? So there is a lot of communication. But what we haven't achieved yet for wolves or bears or any other animal is real cross-border management, and it's something that we've talked about. It's something that we would like to achieve, but we just haven't gotten there yet. And the best example of this is the tetracycline study that I told you about, where we put out all the peanut butter and stuff for the bears. Our neighboring states do that too, and for a number of reasons, it would be a really good idea if we all did it on the same year, because the bears walk across the border. And so talk about the easiest thing. Hey, we're all doing the same thing. It's that, you do it this year and we're going to do it next year. But we can't even get that synced up, even though we all know it would benefit us, because we can't convince, we do it on a 5-year cycle, for example, and I can't convince our decision makers to say, hey, we're going to wait 7 years this time, or we're going to do it in 3 years to get synced up. So we're trying, but failing miserably, I think. So yeah, up there.
So wolves have fairly advanced social structures, alphas and omegas and everything in between. Do you think the hunt is having an effect, or will have an effect in the future on not just the wolves that are being harvested, but also their family members and their pack and everything like that? Is that going to kill off more or cause more, degradation to different, animal species because of it? What's your thoughts?
So the question was, given the complex social structure that wolves have, so wolves live in these pack groups. There's various ranks within the packs, alpha animals, etc. That the question was, what are the potential impacts of hunting these animals, given the potential for disruption of the social structure and impacts on the animals that are not killed during the harvest season? Good question, and that's something that's been brought up quite a bit. So the idea here is that if you have this complex social structure and you disrupt it in some way, so with the wolf pack you have an alpha pair that's the breeding animals in the pack, and you kill one of them, then you've potentially disrupted the breeding behavior of the animals, and we're trying to learn more about that. That's been postulated. There's varying opinions on it in the literature. There's one paper that was written that argues this very point, and we talk in wildlife management of compensatory versus additive mortality. And compensatory mortality being that those animals were going to die anyway of something else, and so you really didn't do anything. Additive mortality being that, okay, those animals weren't going to die anyway, and now you're really impacting the population. And there was an argument made by a researcher who claimed that wolf hunting was super additive, that because of this disruption of the social structure, it's not only an additive mortality, it's super additive, because you've impacted the reproduction, and the full impacts of that harvest season may not be seen for several years in the impacted reproduction. And then a rebuttal paper was written by somebody else saying, no, that's not true, based on data that they had. So as with any good scientific question, there's uncertainty. And one thing that I think is a misconception about wolves is that people think about this and will use the term family group or something, and then they immediately start thinking about their own families, and that if I were to die, I'm about to have a kid, so I'm thinking about myself as an alpha male right now, maybe. But thank you very much. and so if in my family I were to get eaten by a bear, which is a real possibility, then it would disrupt. Then people think about it that way because our family groups are very static. Our family groups are very static, and so if you disrupt a human family, it really does disrupt it. Wolf populations are more dynamic than that. The alpha status isn't something that's necessarily kept for an extended period of time. So there's a lot of turnover naturally. But we are concerned about this issue, and actually we designed some research this summer, and we don't have enough data yet to be able to provide any results, but given all of these new management actions, we decided to look into it. And one of the fun things that we get to do too is summer howl surveys. And so we'll go out and howl for wolves in the middle of the night, and they'll respond, and you can differentiate the pitch of an adult versus a juvenile wolf. And so what we did was identified packs that had animals removed and packs that did not have animals removed, and went and did howl surveys in those areas to determine if the reproductive output of the two groups was different. And it's going to take us a few years before we can definitively answer that question, but it's an astute observation, and the answer is we don't know yet. Yeah. In the back. So the question was, how many wolves do deer eat? We need to flip that one. So the deer are eating all the wolves, and it's really a problem. Sorry. How many deer do wolves eat is the question. Yes. On an annual basis, how many ungulates are consumed by carnivores? Okay, so there's been some research done by Dave Meach, who's one of the preeminent, probably the preeminent wolf biologists in North America. And Meach's research suggests that in Minnesota, so can we agree that Minnesota might be similar to Wisconsin? In Minnesota, Vikings aren't any good, but in Minnesota, they were estimating 15 to 18 adult equivalent deer per wolf. And so adult equivalent being that you got to eat a couple fawns to equal a doe, or you need to, so 15 to 18 adult equivalent deer. So to make the math easy, we'll spot them a couple and say 20. And we've got 800 wolves, so that'd be about 16,000 deer, compared with a couple 100,000 hunter harvest deer.
How many deer get eaten by bears?
An interesting question. That one I don't have a very direct answer for, but we have a team of researchers who are, oh, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. What about bears? The question was how many bears do deer eat? No, how many deer are being eaten by bears? And we don't have as concrete an answer to that question. There's some research being done in Wisconsin right now, actually, where we have two study areas, one in the Shiocton area and one around Winter, where we're collaring deer, both adult and fawn deer, and looking at the causes of mortality with including predation. And bear appear to be a source of mortality, especially in the fawn age class. Bears are really omnivores. They're carnivores. Taxonomically, they're carnivores, but they're really omnivores. And really, if you really look at what they eat, they're really kind of herbivores that appreciate a chicken McNugget every once in a while. So they don't really eat meat. They're very opportunistic. They're not likely to pursue a a 12-point buck through the forest and tackle it. They're just far too roly-poly for that. And so what we do find, though, is that they do eat fawns. And it's interesting, some of the research that has been done in the UP, and I know once I cross borders, all the data is invalid, but done in the UP in Escanaba, actually Heather was involved in that, found that bears do consume fawns, but it's not every bear. And from that study and from some other studies, it seems like it's one of these learned behaviors where there's a few bears out there that figure out during that period of time in the spring when fawns are dropped and they're on the ground, that they figure that out and they'll search those animals out, and those individual bears can take quite a few fawns. But this gets back, when we start thinking about the impacts on the deer population, this gets back to the idea that I talked about earlier of compensatory versus additive mortality. And with fawns, mortality in the fawn age class is largely compensatory. So killing fawns die. It's sad but true. And so if they weren't eaten by the bear, it's likely that many of those animals would have died of other causes. And so the impact on the deer population when fawns are consumed by bears is lower than what the number of animals taken would suggest. I think that is a safe way to say it. Sure.
If a population of a mythical species was 0 in the 1960s and is now 800 and low 800s, how genetically diverse are they?
A mythical animal. So the question is, with our thriving unicorn population of 600, that was at 0 in the 1960s. How is the genetic diversity of that population? So, assuming that these unicorns were naturally recolonized from Minnesota, no, with our wolf population, the genetic diversity is actually very good, and that's because Wisconsin is not an island. If Wisconsin were an island and we did not have a contiguous population with larger populations outside of the state, then the genetic concerns would be greater. But we have connection to the genetic pool in Minnesota and in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but even those populations aren't isolated. Those populations are contiguous with the populations in Ontario. And wolves have an incredible dispersal ability, and so there's a lot of genetic mixing that occurs. With our radio collaring program, we're able to track the dispersal of some of our animals, and we've had animals from Wisconsin disperse as far away as Indiana and Missouri. And actually, a wolf was just killed in Kentucky. It wasn't radio collared, but we assume that it came from the Great Lakes state somewhere. So these animals have the ability to move a great distance, and in doing so, they're bringing their genetics with them and contributing their genetics wherever they end up, unless it happens to be on a bumper in Kentucky. Norm, go ahead.
Isn't it true we lose about 25% of the adult wolves without a hunting season, and only about 30% of the wolf pups survive the first winter?
Correct. Yep. Yeah, that's based. Sorry. The question was, is it accurate that we lose about 25% of the adult wolves each year, and only about 30% of the pups survive each year? And that's accurate based on the long data that we have. We do have high natural mortality, and yeah, that's true. In the doorway there.
Do we have coy wolves, and what's the significance?
Do we have coy wolves? Do we have hybridization between wolves and coyotes? And the answer to that is we don't really know. We haven't identified direct hybridization between the two species, but we do have genetic mixing. Wolf genetics that's a whole nother talk and a whole nother controversy. But wolf genetics is kind of in flux right now. The thinking on wolf genetics. I guess all genetics are always in flux, but the thinking and the theory on wolf genetics is kind of in flux right now. And what appears from the research that's been done on wolves is that when you get north and west, and we're talking continentally here. When you get north and west, you get into a more pure gray wolf genetic. And so in Alaska, for example, you'd have very pure gray wolf genetics. And then as you move south and east within wolf range, you get more things that look more coyote-like. And so when you get into the eastern wolf, which is in Algonquin National Park, the genetics are fairly confused to the point that when we send our genetic samples to Western labs, we need to tell them that they're Great Lakes wolves, because if we send them and they test them as if it's a Rocky Mountain wolf, they'll come back as coyote. So it's a complicated answer, but I think that's about what we know. And I'm going to take one from back there.
Yes, I have another logic question.
Uh-oh.
Why is Wisconsin the only state that is allowing hunting wolves with dogs? And also, why are we the only state that compensates for the killing of dogs?
So the question is, why is Wisconsin the only state that allows the use of dogs in wolf hunting? And why is Wisconsin the only state that compensates for dead hunting dogs? Is that, or all dogs? Just hunting dogs. Yeah, I mean, those are the decisions that have been made through the lawmaking process. Both of those are in state law at this point. I guess I can't comment on why other states haven't done that, and I don't know. Again, why our lawmakers do what they do is murky too. But I mean, I think there's a couple things to point out. One, hound hunting with wolf hunting with hounds is unique in Wisconsin within the United States, but it is a legal method in some of the provinces of Canada. So it's not unique in the continent. And why it was allowed, I think that every state has different regulations on dog hunting. Some states don't allow it at all. Other states allow things that we don't allow. For example, you can hunt deer with dogs in Georgia, and we don't allow that. And I think all of these regulations, most hunting regulations, are based on hunting traditions. And I would say that based upon the organizations that are devoted to these activities and their membership in Wisconsin compared to the other states, we have a stronger tradition of hound hunting in Wisconsin than in our neighboring states, for sure. And I believe that that strong tradition and the strong constituency group that comes along with that was able to influence the policy in that direction, which I guess is just politics. So,
talking about the different policies, what opportunities does the average citizen have to participate in the political process of some of these decisions, and what's the best way for a citizen to participate?
So the question is, what are the best ways for a citizen to participate in the decision-making process on wolf policy? Is that? So there's a number of ways, and part of it depends on what aspect of it you want to influence. Various aspects of wolf policy are contained in different portions of either law or rule. Those are kind of the two big things that we deal with. Laws obviously are passed by the legislature, and rules are developed by the agencies. For the things that are encapsulated in law, the agency doesn't have discretion on those issues. We implement all state law, which is what we should do. And so for anything that citizens may disagree with that's in state law, the most direct method to influence that policy would be to work with their elected representatives to have those laws changed. And if any laws change for wolves or any other species or any other natural resource, if any of those laws were to change, we would implement those change laws. But that's what would have to be required for anything that's in law. Now, the things in policy are a little bit more flexible and are more in my arena, and so things like the wolf management plan, for example, we're going to, in all of our decision-making processes, we try to incorporate as many public input opportunities as possible, and so the wolf management committee is meeting monthly. All of those meetings are open to the public, and at every meeting there's an opportunity for public comment. And so if anybody would like to come to those, you can look at our website. If you search the keyword public input, it will bring you to the meetings calendar. You can see when those are being held. All of them are being held in Wausau. And so that's one opportunity. And then once the draft management plans are put together, we have a more formal public comment period. And that includes a written comment period, and then for wolves, because it's so high profile, we're also going to do a traveling tour of the state and hold public meetings where we'll invite people to come and provide input. We'll then make adjustments based upon that input, and then there'll be, on a second draft, another public comment period, which will be 30 days, which will conclude with a Natural Resources Board hearing, which are open to the public, and any member of the public can register to speak. And so that, I don't know, that's sort of what we have right now, but yeah.
I have a question I think everyone's been wondering. So in a fight between a bear, a pack of wolves, and some cougars, I understand that you have been studying these three for a long time, and we the people would like to know who would win.
All right. Classic debate, the Superman or Spider-Man question. So wolves, bears, and cougars, if they're all in a scrap, who wins? And this is a tough one. This is like a gorilla or a great white shark. Are you in a tree or are you in the ocean? So, how many wolves? Do they get a whole pack?
What would be the average size of a pack in Wisconsin of wolves?
3.8.
3.8 wolves versus, do bears come together or like do they go by like?
They're solo.
All right, one bear versus 3.2 wolves versus how many cougars do you usually find together?
They're usually on their own. Okay, so we got one cougar, we got one bear, and we have 3.8 wolves.
We can round up.
I'm going to say that 0.8 of a wolf is not going to do them much good. So we're going to spot them 4. And for my, boy, if I had to put money on this, so the cougar's screwed, I think. It's just going to climb a tree and watch the fracas, I think. Boy, that's a tough one. A whole pack of wolves. Actually, I think if you splattered them all with bacon grease and put them in a cage and set them loose on each other, I think my money's on the bear. So, but we'll see. So this is in the management plan. We're going to do this. This is chapter 4.2 of the management plan. Is bacon grease in a cage full of all the carnivores in the state. Hey, this is the public input process at work, people. We listen and we implement. Yeah, up front.
Another curiosity type of question. Is there any knowledge that humans have ever consumed the meat of wolves, including Native Americans?
So the question was, is there any knowledge that people have consumed the meat of wolves? And I guess, and the question was not only in modern times, but also in the traditions of Native peoples. I can't answer that question. I honestly don't know. I don't think that it's a common, I can tell you that in Wisconsin, right now, it is not a common practice. I really can't speak on the historic traditions of others. So, yeah.
A couple more questions, and we're going to wrap it up.
What is the current influence of bears and wolves on the Clam Lake elk?
The current influence of bears and wolves on the Clam Lake elk. So this is actually, I talked about all the science that we've been trying to bring together in our wolf management plan writing process. And so we had a presentation from Lane Stoll, who's one of the elk biologists that works for the DNR, to give us information on that very question. And currently, wolves are the primary source of mortality for elk in the Clam Lake Clam Lake elk herd. And for those who aren't aware, we have a recovering, a reintroduced and small herd of elk in the Clam Lake area in the Schwamgen National Forest. And they've been there for quite some time. They haven't really met the recovery goals, and are something that the agency is considering stepping up our efforts in recovery and potentially also adding a population in the Central Forest area. But so right now, wolves are the primary source of mortality in that elk herd. Bears will occasionally also, again, during that calf stage, will occasionally kill animals as well. And there's been some debate, and it's ongoing, so we don't have an answer yet. There's been some debate as to whether or not predator control should be incorporated into the elk management program, that we should remove some of these predators to reduce the mortality associated with them, to allow for recovery. So that's still under debate. What isn't under debate is that another primary limiting factor for those animals is habitat. The area around Clam Lake is largely sugar maple and other hardwood species, and elk are not necessarily associated with hardwoods. They're more associated with early successional forests. And so another possibility is that habitat management, getting back to that question, habitat management may take place in the form of cutting to increase the proportion of early successional forest around the elk herd. So I don't know what course of action will be taken, but those are the current debates going on right now. Yeah, at the bar.
Yeah, Dave, prior to December 2nd, there were a number of predictions made about what would happen and how we used to harvest wolves, and a lot of them included analogies to Michael Vick and stuff like that. You said 35 wolves were harvested with the use of dogs. Do you have any background on how some of those hunts went and what all happened and anything like that?
So the question is the result of the hound hunting season. There were, if I can accurately repeat what you said, that there were concerns prior that there would be fighting between the wolves and the dogs, and the question is, do we have any information on that? Is that okay? So yeah, there have been concerns. That was the basis of the lawsuit that I mentioned earlier. That people were concerned about that, and they took legal action, and that worked its way through the system. It's actually under appeal right now, so that even that decision isn't final. And it's certainly something that we're aware of. And I guess in terms of the information that we have, we don't have any information that we don't have any definitive information that there were aggressive encounters between wolves and dogs during the hunting season. But I'm going to qualify that because there are also no reporting requirements for if a dog is injured, there's no reporting requirements, and if a wolf is injured, that isn't necessarily reported either. But we are concerned that we would at least like to know what is happening out there. Again, this is not an area, this is a matter of state law. This is not an area that the Department of Natural Resources has discretion. But we would like to know what's happening. And so we collect the carcass of every wolf that's killed during the hunting season, and we evaluate those carcasses. We collect biological samples. It's a data gathering tool. We take teeth, and we can age teeth. We take reproductive tracts from females to determine how many of them were reproductive. All these questions are really coming together. We figure out if a cougar was in a cage with them. But we collect biological samples from all these animals, and with all the animals that were taken with the use of dogs, we're going to ask our veterinarian, who has expertise in this area, to look at each of those animals and determine whether or not there are wounds consistent with dogs on those animals. So I can't directly answer that question with any numbers right now, but we are looking into it, and we should have some data by the end of the month.
Okay, I'm going to ask one last question. Can you talk a little bit about the volunteer program you have for tracking that was talked about with Natalie Jablonski on WXPR this morning?
Yeah, so we have a volunteer wolf tracking program. I mentioned it earlier as our primary data collection for for the wolf program, for monitoring the population. And there's a number of people in the room here that I recognize that are either current or former trackers. And I guess I'll just say thanks for all the work that you do. And what we ask people to do, if anybody's interested in getting involved, what we ask people to do is to track wolves within an assigned tracking block. We have 156 tracking blocks that are scattered across wolf range, including everywhere around here because we're right in the heart of wolf range right here. And there's a training program. We have 2 trainings. One is a track training. The other is a wolf ecology training. During those trainings, you learn how to differentiate between species, identify behaviors of the wolves, and be able to determine the number of animals in each of those packs. And that data is all pulled together. So it's actually, I mean, what else are you going to do in February? It's really a fun time. And it's a great opportunity to see what's happening with the wolf population, but while you're out there, you see all sorts of other stuff too, tracks from bobcats and coyotes and fisher and all the other great critters that we share Wisconsin with. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in that program, we're kind of coming to the end of our training season. We normally do trainings earlier than this, but if you go to our website and you search carnivore tracking, it will take you to the site, and there's a link for trainings. There's only 2 more track trainings this year. They're both on Saturday. Again, one of those is at Trees for Tomorrow, and I haven't looked to see if that one's full or not. It's full. It's not? Oh, I don't know. Oh, I heard yes, and then I heard no. You'd think that the guy that runs the program would know. I haven't looked to see if it's full, but there may still be space available. And we have another one at Crex Meadows on Saturday, which is over in Grantsburg on the Minnesota border, so probably less likely a destination for most of you. But we'll certainly have them again next year, and I'd encourage anybody who's interested in getting involved to do so. It's a very important data collection activity for the department, and the way that we know what the impacts of our management actions are, and the way that we know what's going on with the wolf population. But beyond that, it really is a lot of fun. It's one of the favorite parts of my job. So anyway, if people have further questions on that, I can answer them afterwards, I guess.
Can everybody join me in thanking Dr. Dave MacFarland for a fabulous presentation?
Thank you.
Just before you go, please remember our next Science on Tap is February 5th, Lifestyle and Aging with Neil Binkley. And please sign up for email reminders, and please print clearly. Thanks to the Minocqua Brewing Company and the library, Kemp, and Lakeland Badger chapter of the Wisconsin Alumni Association. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.